1,400,000,000. Sit with that for a moment. Let it settle. 1,400,000,000 people, all governed by the same system, all subject to the same laws, the same institutions, the same ruling party. That number is larger than the entire population of Africa. It is more than 4 times the population of the United States. It is roughly 1 in every 5 human beings alive on the planet today. And every single one of them wakes up each morning inside a political system that most people on earth, including the most educated, informed news-reading people, do not actually understand. Not really, not in the way that matters. We have labels for it: communist country, dictatorship, authoritarian state, rising superpower, strategic competitor. Every one of those labels contains a grain of truth. And every one of them, if taken alone, will mislead you. Because China is not a label. China is a system, and systems do not fit on bumper stickers. What you're about to watch is not a political opinion. It is not an argument for or against the way China is governed. It does not begin with the assumption that the Chinese government is either admirable or monstrous. It begins with a more fundamental question: how does this actually work? How do you govern a country this large, this complex, this ancient, this diverse, a country with 56 officially recognized ethnic groups, 9 time zones, 8,000 kilometers of coastline, and a civilizational history stretching back 4,000 years? How do you take that and run it reliably, continuously, for decade after decade after decade? Because whatever else you believe about China, whatever moral or political conclusions you reach, the operational question is extraordinary. And most discussions of China never get to it because they get stuck arguing about whether the system is good or bad before they have understood what the system actually is. So that is where we start, with the system. To understand how China is governed today, you have to go back to 1978, not to 1949, when the People's Republic was founded, not to the Long March, or the Revolution, or the Civil War, to 1978. Because 1978 is when the country made a choice that changed everything, not just for China, but for the entire world. In 1978, a small, pragmatic, unassuming man named Deng Xiaoping consolidated power after the death of Mao Zedong and the arrest of the Gang of Four. And Deng looked at the country he had inherited and reached a conclusion that was, in the context of the Chinese Communist Party's official ideology, almost heretical. He concluded that the Maoist model was failing, that central planning, ideological purity, revolutionary struggle, and the suppression of the markets had not delivered what had been promised, that China was poor, that its people were exhausted, and that something had to fundamentally change. His solution was not democracy. It was not the dismantling of the party. It was something more unusual, a bet, a calculated wager that the party could survive and strengthen itself, not by tightening ideological control, but by delivering material results. Let the economy open. Let the markets operate. Let some people get rich. Let foreign investment in. And in exchange, the party keeps power. Absolute, unquestioned, unchallengeable power. That is the bargain. On the party's side, the delivery has been, by any objective historical measure, extraordinary. In 1978, China's GDP per capita was approximately 156 US dollars. In 2023, adjusted for purchasing power, it exceeded $13,000. That is an increase of more than 80 times in the space of a single human lifetime. 800 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty since 1978, a number so large it is almost incomprehensible. The World Bank has called it the fastest sustained reduction in poverty in history. The physical transformation of the country is no less staggering. China has built the world's longest high-speed rail network, over 45,000 kilometers as of 2024, more than the rest of the world combined. It has constructed 254 airports. It has built or massively expanded dozens of cities that barely existed 30 years ago. Shenzhen, to take the most dramatic single example, was a small fishing village of 30,000 people in 1979. Today, it is a metropolis of nearly 14 million people, home to some of the world's most advanced technology companies and one of the busiest container ports on Earth. This did not happen by accident. It happened because the party made it happen through a combination of state direction, market liberalization, infrastructure investment, and an industrial policy that was more deliberate and more consistent than almost any government in the democratic world has managed. Whether you admire or distrust the Chinese government, this record of delivery is the foundation of everything. It is the reason the bargain held, and it is the source of something that outside observers frequently underestimate: genuinely and legitimacy. But the bargain was never only about money. This is the part that Western analysis most consistently misses. The Chinese Communist Party does not derive its legitimacy solely from economic performance. If it did, then every time growth slowed, every time there was a recession or a financial crisis, the regime would be on the verge of collapse. And commentators have been predicting that collapse for 30 years and it has not come. The reason this collapse has not come is that there is a second source of legitimacy, one that is, if anything, deeper and more durable than GDP growth. It is national dignity. The official narrative that every Chinese child learns in school, the narrative that is woven through every major ceremony, every party congress, every speech by every senior leader, is the story of the century of humiliation. The century of humiliation runs from 1839 to 1949. It begins with the First Opium War, when the British Empire forced China at gunpoint to open its markets to addictive narcotics, seized the island of Hong Kong, and imposed unequal treaties that stripped China of legal sovereignty over its own territory. It continues through the Second Opium War, through the Taiping Rebellion, which killed more people than the First World War, through the First Sino-Japanese War, in which China lost Korea and Taiwan, through the Boxer Uprising and the foreign powers that marched into Beijing and looted the imperial Paris, through the collapse of the Qing dynasty, through the warlordism and the civil war, and through the most traumatic chapter of all, the Japanese occupation of the 1930s and 1940s, which included the Nanjing Massacre, in which an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians were killed in a matter of weeks. 110 years of invasion, occupation, exploitation, and humiliation at the hands of foreign powers. And then, in 1949, Mao Zedong stood at the gate of heavenly peace in Beijing and declared that China had stood up, that the humiliation was over, that China would never again be carved up by outside powers, never again be treated as a subject people, never again kneel. This narrative is not invented propaganda, deployed cynically to manipulate a credulous population. That is too simple, and it is condescending. For hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens, including people who are critical of the current government, including people who risked their safety to protest in 1989, including people who share nothing else with the Communist Party, this history is real. It is felt. It corresponds to what the grandparents experienced, what their parents were taught, and what they themselves can see when they read the historical record. The century of humiliation is not a myth. It happened. And the party's argument that it ended the humiliation, that it restored China's sovereignty, that only the party can guarantee it never happens again, resonates because there is truth in it. This gives the party a source of legitimacy that does not depend on the economy. It does not require people to be satisfied with their wages, or their housing, or their retirement savings. It only requires them to feel that China is respected, that China is sovereign, that China is strong. And it means that when the party frames any foreign criticism of its human rights record, of its treatment of ethnic minorities, of its activities in the South China Sea as an attempt to humiliate China, to interfere in China's internal affairs, to restore the colonial relationship of the 19th century, it is activating something real in the emotional and historical memory of its population, not manufacturing it, activating it. That is the fundamental difference in political dynamic from what most Western governments deal with, and it cannot be understood without this history. So the party has legitimacy, two kinds of it: economic delivery and national dignity. But legitimacy alone does not run a country, especially not a country this size. You need a machine. The machine that runs China is the organizational structure of the Chinese Communist Party, and it is one of the most sophisticated, extensive, and deeply embedded government apparatuses in the history of human civilization. Let us start with the numbers. China has 33 provincial-level administrative divisions, including 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 directly controlled municipalities, and 2 special administrative regions. Below them, 293 prefecture-level cities. Below them, 2,844 county-level divisions. Below them, over 40,000 township-level units. At every single level of this hierarchy, every province, every prefecture, every county, every township, there is both a government structure and a party structure, and the party structure supervises the government structure. The governor of a province reports to the provincial party secretary, who is typically more powerful than the governor. The mayor of a city reports to the city party secretary. In many cases, and at the national level in particular, the same individuals hold both positions simultaneously. The state governs, the party watches the state, and in practice, they are often the same person wearing two different hats. At the apex of this structure sits the Politburo Standing Committee, currently 7 men. In other periods, it has been 5 or 9. The size is itself a political variable, a reflection of the balance of factional power at any given moment. These 7 individuals are the most powerful people in China. They collectively set the broad direction of party policy on everything from the economy to foreign affairs to internal security. They chair the committees and commissions that run the country's most important institutions, and they are, to a degree that would be familiar in any boardroom but is rarely acknowledged in any public forum, the product of decades of bureaucratic competition, factional maneuver, and elite negotiation. Below the Standing Committee is the full Politburo, 35 members. Below that, the Central Committee, currently 205 full members and 171 alternate members. These are the senior officials of China, the provincial party secretaries, the heads of the major state enterprises, the senior military commanders, the directors of the intelligence services. And below all of that, threading through every level, 98 million party members. 98 million people who have formally joined the Chinese Communist Party, who attend party meetings, who study party documents, who in their workplaces and communities and neighborhoods are the visible face of the system. To put that in perspective, 98 million people is larger than the population of Germany. It is larger than any single country in Western Europe. The Chinese Communist Party is by membership one of the largest organizations in the history of the world, and it is present, literally physically present, in every significant institution in Chinese society. The single most powerful instrument of the party's organizational control is not the army, not the police, not the surveillance system. It is the organization department. The organization department manages personnel. Specifically, it manages the appointment, evaluation, promotion, and removal of every senior official in China, across government, across the military, across state-owned enterprises, across state media, across the major universities. We are talking about a list of approximately 5,000 positions at the national and provincial level. Positions whose occupants are chosen not by elections, not by independent boards, not by shareholders, but by this single party body. The power this confers is difficult to overstate. In any system, the people who control appointments control behavior. If you know that your career, your salary, your housing, your status, your children's education opportunities depend on the organization department's assessment of your performance and loyalty, then you will act accordingly. You will not publicly dissent from party policy. You will not protect people that the party has decided to target. You will not use your institutional position to build an independent power base, because the organization department is always watching, and its reach extends everywhere. This is how a party of 98 million members, governing over 1 billion people, maintains coherence, not primarily through fear, though fear plays a role, but through a deeply embedded system of incentives and advancement in which loyalty to the party is the prerequisite for everything else. The party's presence inside private companies deserves particular attention. In theory, private companies in China are private. They are owned by shareholders. They have boards. They hire and fire employees based on business considerations. In practice, the party requires any company with 3 or more party members among its employees to establish an internal party branch. The branch is not just a social club. It has the formal right to participate in major decisions, including the appointment of senior executives. For most of the reform era, these branches were largely ceremonial. The party's presence existed on paper but did not interfere significantly with business operations. Under Xi Jinping, this has changed. In 2017, the party explicitly strengthened the role of party branches in both state-owned and private companies. Party secretaries in major corporations were given greater formal authority. Xi Jinping's personal ideological framework began to appear in corporate training programs. The most visible demonstration of how this works came in 2020 and 2021, when the Chinese government launched what it called a regulatory reset of the technology sector. Ant Group, the financial technology company affiliated with Alibaba, had been preparing the largest initial public offering in history. Days before it was due to list on the stock exchange, the Chinese government suspended the IPO. Ant's founder Jack Ma had recently made a public speech in which he criticized Chinese state banks for being too risk-averse and too bureaucratic. The IPO was suspended. Jack Ma disappeared from public view for 30 months. When he reappeared, he had visibly changed. The speech was never made again. Alibaba was subsequently fined approximately $2.8 billion, a record. Didi, China's ride-hailing company, was forced to delist from the New York Stock Exchange weeks after it had listed there, having apparently done so without full party approval. The message to every major private company in China was unambiguous. You operate in the space the party permits, at the pace the party allows, in the direction the party approves.